Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. It is a pleasure to see everybody here. I want to thank YAF. I want to thank the college Republicans. And I'm really happy to be here at Emory. I'm here. We're at Georgia. We're in Stacey Abrams' home state. And I haven't kept up on it since November, but has she conceded the election yet, or is she still technically running for, because I know they brought in all those Democrats to fill in all those extra ballots. I don't know if it's happened yet, but I'm glad to be here. I'm also sorry to say I forgot to bring my chalk. I initially, for those of you in the home audience who don't get that joke, at Emory University 2 years ago, I remember reading about this at the time, somebody committed a vicious and awful hate crime at this university, an unthinkable villainy and horror. Somebody chalked the phrase Trump 2016. This caused mayhem. There were protests. I believe they threw the president of the university out of his job for this unspeakable horror of not writing Hillary 2016, of choosing the other presidential candidate. So I was going to come and write in Trump 2020, but I didn't want to set the university ablaze, so I guess maybe next time. It is also very good to be here in Atlanta before the Green New Deal goes into effect and obliterates all air travel. It will make it very difficult for me to come in from Los Angeles once the Green New Deal obliterates all air travel, as well as all automobile travel, as well as 88% of the American energy industry. It will, of course, allow electric cars to remain, but not for very long. One, because electric cars are actually worse for the environment than gasoline-powered cars. A lot of people are unaware of that. And two, because electricity does not come from magic. Electricity comes from coal, which is very dirty and filthy and polluting, and certainly will not be allowed in the Green New Deal. It just occurs to me I should actually probably go to the University of Hawaii first before the Green New Deal goes in, because I can always take a train to Atlanta. I can always high-speed, solar-powered wind trains, or so, I don't know. The Green New Deal, by the way, if you haven't read it, also will make it very difficult, not just for you to get around without the cars or the trains or the automobiles, but also it will make it hard for you to stay at home because it will abolish your house. The Green New Deal promises to destroy and rebuild every residential and non-residential building in the entire country within 10 years. Every residential and non-residential building, it turns out, is every single building in the entire country. And those will be outlawed by the Green New Deal, which everybody is endorsing. All of the beautiful things, the beautiful houses in Atlanta, beautiful apartment buildings in New York, homes in Beverly Hills, all of them will be gone. And this brings us circuitously to our topic tonight, which is the simple joys of being right, the greater joy felt by being right rather than wrong or left-wing. But I repeat myself. The Green New Deal is emblematic of the left's ultimate goal, which is to abolish, to destroy, to change, and to fundamentally rebuild every single thing in this country. What we have, who we are, what we possess, what we know. This reminds us of Barack Obama, who said that he wanted to fundamentally transform the country. And conservatives got into trouble when they suggested Barack Obama might not love his country. So how dare you? You don't want to fundamentally transform things that you love. If you ever, Valentine's Day is coming up, if you turn to your little honey on Valentine's Day and say, baby, baby, I love you so much, I want to fundamentally transform you. I want you to be unrecognizable when I'm through with you. You will not have a very good Valentine's Day. And the Green New Deal would do this. It would remake the United States entirely, politically, intellectually, and spiritually, physically. It would involve a radical redistribution of wealth. It would involve a government takeover of 1/6 of the U.S. economy. Not just any sector, by the way, the healthcare sector. We're talking about urgent questions of life and death. It would destroy instantly, within one instant, tens of millions of jobs. And it would end our deliberative Republican system of government. It would do this. There's a little line in the draft legislation. It says that the committee that will be appointed for the Green New Deal will decide on a universal basic income, it will decide on welfare programs, it will decide on a universal socialist healthcare program, and any other programs that the committee deems necessary. Which is any law, that's anything whatsoever, without any sort of democratic accountability. Imagine hating your culture and your tradition and your society so much that all you wanted to do was rip it to the ground and rebuild it within 10 years. Is it any wonder that conservatives are happier than left-wingers? If you look at the various presidential candidates, the difference between the right and the left in terms of smiles and frowns could not be clearer. You have Chief Hiawatha, Senator Elizabeth Warren, who is slogging her way to the White House, one miserable beer at a time, looking unhappy with each passing sip. You have Beto, Robert Francis O'Rourke, wandering the country aimlessly, writing angsty diary entries as though he were a teenage girl on Medium.com. You know, just finding himself, man, just wandering for a bit. You have, of course, Senator Spartacus, Cory Booker, crying tears of rage at every opportunity. And then, those are the candidates on the left. Then you have on the right, our president, Donald Trump, smiling and tweeting. The more he smiles, the more he tweets. The more he tweets, the more he smiles. The more I smile, too. He said this, I really liked this one. He tweeted out about the Green New Deal. I think it is very important for the Democrats to press forward with their Green New Deal. It would be great for the so-called carbon footprint to permanently eliminate all planes, cars, cows, oil, gas, and the military, even if no other country would do the same. Brilliant. One gets the sense that this man really enjoys being president. He really enjoys it. I enjoy it. And he enjoys it because his policies are working. His policies have corresponded in a really delightful way to reality. The economy is booming. We have joblessness at all-time lows, especially minority joblessness, Hispanic and black and female unemployment. We have a relative peace abroad. We have an approval rating that is now reflecting this. President Trump today just passed 52% in the daily presidential tracking poll. We have excellent Supreme Court judges and justices who are interpreting the law rather than rewriting the law. These are policies that are working out well for the country. They're corresponding with reality. And I don't just mean economic reality. I mean they're corresponding with our tradition. They're corresponding, in a way, with the American people across demographic lines, across political lines. You have the Trump Democrats. I suppose they're now called the populist movement, the Trump populists. You have it across racial lines. President Trump's support among black voters doubled within the first 8 months of his presidency, and it has continued to go up since then. The same is true among Hispanic voters. He's grown the tent because of the effectiveness of his policies. Some people have the idea that it's because of his acerbic personality that he's attracting people, that he just attracts mean-spirited people to them. I don't think there's any evidence for this. When Trump is really mean, when he's really going after people, when he's doing things that they deem cruel, his approval rating does drop. And at the moment, he's just winning with like hashtag sick and tired, totally winning. He had a very successful State of the Union address. The Democrat presidential candidates humiliate themselves, and his approval continues to increase. So he enjoys it. And this is the key word. I never got the feeling that Barack Obama enjoyed being president. He always looked so miserable doing it. He went gray in about 8 days. He got wrinkles on his face. His plans were constantly foiled. His strategies went awry. His legacy has been totally eviscerated. There is no legacy left for the Obama administration because it turns out that opposing reality is not terribly conducive to happiness. There's a line that Democrats used to use all the time that George Bernard Shaw he was a playwright, and Robert Kennedy would quote this line. He'd say, "Some people see things that are and ask why, but I dream things that never were and ask why not." as though this were some inspiring, yeah, man, totally, snaps. But it's not. That line is from a play called Back to Methuselah, and the line is actually from the mouth of the devil. It's from the mouth of the serpent tempting Eve in the garden. Fantasy is not conducive to human happiness. And we have a cult of fantasy now in our country. 1/2 of American millennials believe that there are more than 2 biological sexes. How many people in this room think that there are more than 2 biological sexes? See, there's a little self-selection here. If you come to see the Covfefe on Campus tour, you are probably a little more tuned into biological realities. But among our fellow young Americans, 1/2 believe that there are more than 2. Facebook says that there are 56 biological sexes as of an hour and a half ago. There may be more now. I haven't checked it since I left my hotel room. Millennials are 60 times as likely as the average adult population to be confused about their own biological sex. This has led them to become the most anxious, most depressed, most overprescribed, and most suicidal generation in American history. Fantasy is not conducive to happiness. This confusion stems from the left's embrace of radical skepticism. There are a lot of words for this. You can call it postmodernism, relativism, subjectivism, nihilism. It all amounts to the same thing, which is a rejection of the truth, a rejection of even the concept of the truth, or the concept of objective reality in favor of my truth, or your truth, or his truth, or Zer's truth. This creates a serious problem for conservatives, not just you all on campus, even people like me who go around and give lectures on campuses. It shows that fundamentally the left is unwilling to reason. There is a hard core of the left wing right now that will not be reasoned with. In order to reason, you need to at least accept the premises of reality, that there is an objective truth, we have different opinions about it, and that's what we're arguing about. If you deny that, there's no debate, there's no logic. It actually sort of makes sense from that perspective as to why they try to shut us all up. Because they're not having a debate. For them, politics descends into a brutal interest battle where there is nothing civil or reasonable about it. So I propose an alternative of talking out the left and bringing them over to our point of view. And my alternative is to show them how much nicer it is on the right. It's so much nicer. It's so much more enjoyable. It's so much less miserable. You judge the tree by its fruit. And if we show the left the logical conclusions of their terrible premises, I think they might be more likely to come on over. That's the best option that I have. The evidence is clear. Conservatives are happier than leftists. Conservatives are more content and more joyful than leftists. USC did a study last year. They analyzed 5 different studies. It was a meta-analysis. 20,000 people in 16 different countries from the 1970s all the way up to 2017. It showed that conservatives are happier, more satisfied, find greater purpose in life. And what kind of conservatives are we talking about? Are we talking about those squishy, vishy kind like John Kasich? Are we talking about those wishy-washy moderates who make Twitter videos about how much they love yoga yesterday? It was so awful. If you haven't seen it, do not watch it. It's just unwatchable. No, it isn't those middle-of-the-roaders. If you stand in the middle of the road, you're going to get hit by a truck. These studies actually showed that the more conservative you are, the happier you will be. This is very helpful for someone like me, whose politics is slightly to the right of Genghis Khan. For those of you who are similarly Attila the Hun fellows, this will also be good for you. There was a study from Pew Research in 2006. Conservative Republicans are 68% more likely than liberal Democrats to be very happy. Extreme conservatives, self-described, are the happiest of all, according to these surveys. So why are they so happy? We can begin with religion. Religion is the basis of our identity. As St. Andrew Breitbart of the Blessed Hollywood Conservatives showed, politics is downstream of culture, and culture is downstream of religion. Cult and culture come from the same word. What the culture worships will define that culture, and everybody has a religion. Some people pretend they don't have a religion, but what you worship will define your culture. So some people worship God, some people worship money, some people worship sex, some people, you know, it depends on the time of day or the day of the week, but everybody has a religion. Conservatives are more religious, and specifically Christian, than the left. Religious conservatives, rather, outnumber religious leftists 4-1. This is not news. Anybody who happened to watch the Democrat National Convention in 2012 would have seen the entire party booing God in their national platform, which is good evidence that you're not worshiping God if you're booing him. Religious people are twice as likely as the irreligious to consider themselves very happy. This, of course, makes sense. If you believe that God loves you, that you live in a world with purpose and reason, and that ultimately you're going to be with God forever, you're more likely to be happy than if you think that the world is just a sick joke and a tale told by an idiot full of sound and fury, signifying nothing, that we all take a dirt nap and get eaten by worms. That's not a very happy-making idea. Conservatives take part in religious behaviors, much higher rate rather than leftists do. Conservatives specifically get and stay married, and marriage makes people happier. Though this may not always appear to be the case, it's true. The Institute for Family Studies showed in 2015, one, that conservatives are more likely to get and stay married, and controlling for economic factors, kids in red states are much more likely to grow up in the home of both of their biological parents. The General Social Survey showed that Republicans are more happily married, more likely to remain in their first marriage. And I can just speak from personal experience. I was an atheist for 10 years-ish, from 13 until about 23. I was rather single during much of that period as well. I reverted to Christianity after college, and I got married to my wife last year, to sweet little Elisa. My life has vastly improved. Her life has deteriorated and fallen apart, but my life has gotten very, very good, and I can personally attest to it. But religion and marriage don't tell the whole story. There are many different kinds of conservatives. Many of them don't realize that they are conservative or that they are partaking in a Christian tradition that has just come to them through their culture. Religion plays a role. It's the foundation, but there are many other joys to being right. The most obvious one is humor and laughing. The left cannot laugh at the moment. We all know that the left can't meme, but the left also can't laugh. They can't. They don't laugh anymore. They screech and they yell and they cry and they try to get the presidents of universities fired for chalk that says Trump 2016. Comedians don't play college campuses anymore. Jerry Seinfeld won't play college campuses. A lot of others won't either because they're afraid that the kids are going to pretend to be offended and try to ruin their careers with one or two tweets. And the left lacks a sense of proportion, a sense of balance, a sense of humor. Every Republican president these days is Hitler. Every Republican policy is not just going to cause political pain, it will literally destroy the world. It will cause the end of human life as we know it. Forget those polar bears. Those polar bears are long dead. It will kill them all. Horace Walpole observed that to the man who thinks life is a comedy, but to the man who feels life is a tragedy. Conservatives have a more balanced, reasoned, logical view of the world. It's based on sounder premises, premises that acknowledge reality and truth. The left is stuck in its own subjective tyranny of feelings. And when you are a slave to your emotions and your passions, you are not going to have a very good time. This unreasoned despair leads to rather dark policy prescriptions. You can see this in particular up in Virginia with Governor Blackface. Governor Blackface now, in his unreasoned view of the world, his absurd view of the world, is advocating fourth trimester abortion. He's advocating post-birth abortion. Of course, there's no such thing. He's advocating killing babies after they've been born. And then, when he's called out on this on radio, he says, no, but listen, I'm specifically talking about killing babies with deformities. As though that makes it better, as though because the baby's missing a finger, his life is not valuable. He should be killed after he has been born, according to Governor Northam. And this was not just a gaffe. Governor Northam is a very stupid man, but it is not just a gaffe. This comes naturally If anything, Governor Northam is honest. And if, you know, Governor Northam, by virtue of his simplicity, he shows his blackface from the 1980s. Turns out every other Virginia politician was wearing blackface in the 80s too, so he's not the only one. He shows the logical conclusion of this absurd and unbalanced culture, such that to the left, if you're a little bit imperfect, you deserve death. Though what the left doesn't realize is that we're all imperfect. We all have foibles. Our imperfections, actually, in the grand scheme of things, are fairly funny. We can laugh about these. Incongruity and imperfection makes for a good joke, but not to the left. To the left, imperfection is a horror. It is a humiliation. It is something to be denied, stomped out, snuffed out, and killed. Now, this, in part, comes from the left's embrace of pride as a virtue, as the virtue. I don't know how they managed to convince themselves of this, but the left managed to take the queen of all sins, pride, which goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall, and turn it into their greatest virtue. They hold pride parades, not just for gay pride, for all sorts of pride. Fat pride, skinny pride, black pride, lady pride, not white pride. White pride you are not allowed to do, but all other sorts of pride. Pride, which is a vice, pride, which is the queen of sin, they exalt as their highest virtue. Now, this brings us to another discrete joy of being right, which is diversity. The left despises imperfection. If you contradict their narrow, homogeneous view of perfection, they want to discard you. Literally, they will kill you for it, as Ralph Northam made very clear. Conservatives love diversity. This is ironic because the left says they like diversity and then they disinvite people and yell and screech at you if you have a different opinion. The conservatives truly love diversity and always have. Conservatives love the variety of life. We love to be surprised by the differences among people, the differences among experiences, and the expressions of our human nature. There's a quote from Thomas Carlyle that this calls to mind. "Every man is my superior in that I can learn something from him." You don't have to recite the party line. You don't need to toe the line point by point. You can learn something from everybody. You can learn something from those screechy blue-haired leftists as well. They can teach you something about ideology or about youth or about going down a wrong intellectual path. But the left can't stand diversity. So the left exalts only its own perverse view of perfection. This is why it disinvites conservatives from campus. This is why the left censors conservatives through big tech. So big tech companies persistently have kicked conservatives off of the platforms, shadow banned them. I've had my show censored constantly because I'm such a threat. I'm so intimidating. I had a conversation with a priest on my show about the sacrament of marriage. You could not possibly get drier content than this. Not exactly provocateur. The episode was banned. It was banned from the internet. The left is threatened by free speech because the left is not confident that its own ideas correspond with reality. This too flows naturally from its premises, which deny objective truth, which deny a real epistemology, which deny that we're all talking about one thing. So there is no way for us to have a civil dialogue. It is just brute force and a shouting match. This is another joy of being right, is clarity of vision. Nobody sees with perfect clarity, of course, but generally speaking, conservatives have a much clearer political vision. This is borne out by social science surveys, which show that the right understands the left much better than the left understands the right. We generally understand where left-wingers are coming from, because the left brings to their political vision very narrow ideology, the rationalization that strips away inconvenient facts. A good example of this came yesterday with Amy Klobuchar's announcement that she's running for the Democrat nomination for president. She's a senator from Minnesota. She's standing there in the middle of freezing cold Minnesota. And Amy Klobuchar starts talking about how global warming is going to kill us all. Now, by the time she was finished talking about how global warming is going to kill us all, her whole head was covered in snow. She had little snowflakes all over her hair. Everyone was shivering cold. You're in the midst of a polar vortex throughout all of the country. I've been traveling a whole lot the last few weeks. Everywhere I go, it's colder than the next place. And she says that we need to immediately re-enter the Paris Climate Accord. They all boo, yeah, Amy, we're going to enter the... The United States presently, which is not party to the Paris Climate Accord, is doing a better job of upholding the tenets of the Paris Climate Accord than the signatory nations themselves. We were told when they tried to pass that ridiculous climate accord, we were told that if we don't do it, the whole world is going to end. So then we didn't do it. How are you feeling? Are you feeling healthy? Are you feeling okay? Not sick? Everybody's good? Everybody's fine. And ironically, the countries that have signed on to it, they don't really care. They're not reducing their air pollution. They're not reducing carbon dioxide. But we are doing that. Nevertheless, she says we need to destroy the entire American economy for global warming. Never mind that the predictions don't ever seem to come true. Never mind that New York has not been underwater for 5 years. Never mind that Florida, just neighbor down to the south, has not been underwater for 5 years. Never mind that the polar bears are not dead. The polar bears are doing just fine. Their populations have increased. Never mind that Amy Klobuchar was freezing cold, bundled up in snow. No, ignore the reality. Who cares? Don't believe your lying eyes. Who cares what's going on in the real world? What we have to care about is what is going on in the leftist fantasy theories. That is what she told us yesterday. Ideology discourages learning. This is another simple joy of being right. If you've got the answers to everything, if you have a totalizing political system, ideology, then you've got nothing to learn. For the left, politics and history are science, not art. Conservatives view it as art. Aristotle says politics is a practical science. You can't formulate it all in a little calculation in an Excel spreadsheet. You can't have a bunch of egghead bureaucrats planning out everybody's life exactly for them. Politics is an art because we have free will. We are free people. The world is infinitely, immensely complex. That's a beautiful thing. It's part of why we love the variety of life. But for the left, it's a formula. And if you find the formula, then everything is supposed to follow progress perfectly. This is why they're always shocked to find out that they lose elections. They don't ever believe it when it happens. When Stacey Abrams lost that election here in Georgia, she would not give it up. She was supposed to win. The formula said it. That was the path to progress. The only reason Stacey Abrams ended up conceding, I'm certain, is because all those little Democrat activists who came in to fill out forms for fraudulent votes, she didn't want them to get carpal tunnel. So she said, no, in the interest of your health, stop writing in all those fake votes. Hillary Clinton was supposed to win, and then when she didn't win, she found out it was the Macedonians. It was James Comey. It was Bernie. It was, did I mention the Macedonians? It was the Russians. It was everybody except the American people who did not want to vote for her. Those deplorable, irredeemable American people. Brings us to another joy of being right, which is love. Conservatives love our countrymen, even Hillary Clinton, sometimes, not all the time. In so much as she is our countryman, we love her. The left doesn't love its country. This is why the left wants to knock down all of the buildings and rebuild all of them within 10 years. This is why the left wants fully open borders. This is why the left protests the American flag. The American left does not love its country or countrymen. The left loves humanity, but it doesn't like human beings very much. It loves humanity in the abstract, but it doesn't like humanity in the particular, in the real, in the familial, in that with which we have a relationship. This is why you see it baked into this ideology. This is why you see it baked into utopia. This is why, frankly, the left is so angry at all of the conservatives, is because they have the keys to progress. And if you impede progress, you can be one of two things: extraordinarily stupid or evil, have bad intentions. You're a bigot, you're a sexist, you're a racist, you're whatever silly euphemism they want to use. Those are the only two options. And who could love either of those people? As a result, the left is more likely to unfriend people on social media than conservatives are. I've been traveling to all these campuses. I just saw in the student newspaper at Washington University, there was a headline that read, quote, "It's okay that conservatives don't feel welcome." It's okay. Now, it's okay, according to this kid, because we already know conservative ideas are wrong. We've never read them or engaged with them or talked about them or thought about them for 5 seconds, but we know that they're wrong. So it's okay for conservatives not to feel welcome. At my own dear alma mater of Yale the other day, they published an opinion piece in the student newspaper about how white men with brown hair are evil. All of them, every single one. And the whole point of the piece was that because all these kids at Yale end up becoming Brett Kavanaugh or somebody, they really hate Brett Kavanaugh, they really don't like Brett Kavanaugh. Because of that, it is moral, it's a moral duty for students at Yale to go up to every white, brown-haired young man there and ruin his life. Find a picture of him too drunk at a party, find a text message that looks kind of weird, and ruin his life. That was the thesis of the op-ed. What a cold and miserable way to go through life. What an absolutely terrible way to view your fellow man and your institutions and the world. The idea that if anything is different from you, that it is offensive. That is a miserable way to go through life. This is the definition of pride, by the way, to say that everything that I am is perfect. Everything I am and have and know is perfect, and everything that isn't me is terrible. That is pride. Michael Oakeshott, a wonderful philosopher who does not get read enough, gave a very good definition of conservatism, and I think it gets to a little bit why we enjoy it so much. He said, to be conservative is to prefer the familiar to the unknown, to prefer the tried to the untried, fact to mystery, the actual to the possible, the limited to the unbounded, the near to the distant, the sufficient to the superabundant, the convenient to the perfect, present laughter to utopian bliss. Familiar relationships and loyalties will be preferred to the allure of more profitable attachments. To acquire and to enlarge will be less important than to keep, to cultivate, and to enjoy. We don't want to fundamentally transform things. Evolution, not revolution. The conservative view, in which we accept our limits in order to exercise our creativity, because these limits are not such a bad thing. Like the parameters of a poem, they allow you to be more creative. They allow you more enjoyment. This view in which we look on the world with awe and wonder, in which we feel gratitude for our lives, which we did not earn and which we did not invent, in which we venerate the author of those lives and the order that he created, in which we defend and cherish the tradition that carries this vision throughout the ages. This view is more conducive to joy because it's more in line with the truth, because it's more in line with reality. For leftists, for there aren't very many of you in the audience on the left, I think most are on the right. For those of you in the television audience who are on the left, ask yourself, if you are miserable every single day, if you are constantly irritated by the news cycles, by your conservative uncle at the dinner table, by your conservative friends on Facebook, if you are constantly and perpetually joyless, do you maybe have a problem? Is it possible that the problem is not Donald Trump, it's not George W. Bush before him, it's not Ronald Reagan before him, that maybe you have the problem, and maybe the problem is not so much psychological as philosophical? To them I say, come on over. The water is warm. Global warming has made the water warm. It's really, really nice. Just dip your toe in, you won't regret it. You can choose how to live. You can choose another mode of viewing the world, and you can choose a new politics. You can either choose to remain wrong or, and this is the one that I recommend, you can choose to be right. Thank you very much.
We can all line up down here along this aisle. And if you disagree, I know this is a common tactic with Ben. I'm not sure if you do that.
You know, the Daily Wire makes me do this rule. If you disagree with me, you have to cut the line. I think this creates a terrible and perverse incentive, but that's okay. That's what I have to do. That's what my bosses say.
Okay, so if you disagree, you get to come to the front of the line. So I know some of you are itching. Bubby, you can come on down. All right. I'll start it off then, because I'm president and you're not, like Donald Trump says. My first question, what do you see being the consequences of there being an elimination of the center? And do you see a third party emerging anytime in the future?
I think it's already been promised to us. The loss of a center in American politics can be either a good thing or a bad thing. It depends where the center is. The conservative movement is responsible for destroying the American center. It's responsible in so much as there was a liberal consensus, and then in the 1950s there was a more concerted conservative movement. Now, it wasn't our fault exclusively for long, because then the radical left came in, pushing what was, in those days, socialism, versions of Marxism, the introduction of identity politics, the destruction of the barrier between the personal and the political, the anti-Western politics, hey, hey, ho, ho, Western civ has got to go. And this process has continued unabated for the last 50 or so years, to the point that now you have democratic socialists running openly as Democrat candidates for office, and you have a conservative movement that is more conservative. I think this is a very good thing. Howard Schultz, the billionaire from Canarsie, who's self-made and actually a fairly inspiring figure, is a lifelong Democrat, but he can't run as a Democrat because Democrats are socialists now. He is going to run. He's not going to win, though he would go a long way, I think, toward creating a viable third party in the United States. I like this idea in so much as it will throw the election to Donald Trump, so I'm pleased about that, and it will force the Democrats to moderate. It will force them to realize that they have got to ditch some of the Bolshevism. They can't collectivize the farms in 10 years. This would be a very good thing. However, broadly speaking, third parties don't always help us out. Third parties can be spoilers and can actually undermine the will of the American people. And in our republic, that's an important thing. So what I would much rather see than a third party is a candidate like Howard Schultz come in, disrupt things, throw the election to a Republican, and more importantly, bring Democrats not just back to the center, not to be moderate conservatives or something, just bring them back to the point that they accept objective reality, that they accept that there is truth about which we can argue. If we did that, that would be a huge benefit to American politics.
Hey, so you talk about objective and subjective reality. Do you believe that President Trump is actually thriving off of this subjective reality in politics today?
I think that he's thriving in so much as he makes fun of the absurdities of the left, and this gives him a lot of material. So he's always talking about how the whitest woman in America pretended to be Native American for 30 years to advance her career, that she filed with the Texas State Bar as American Indian in her own handwriting. This helps him out. Without these subjective, ridiculous, emotivist fantasies of the left, we probably would not have a Donald Trump phenomenon. We would not reward a man who speaks bluntly like a guy who grew up in Queens and who has a very basic relationship to people and to the media and a sort of basic and visceral understanding of human nature. That really helps him. The notion that President Trump is himself living in some kind of fantasy, I think, is totally overblown. They throw these silly terms like fake news around or alternative facts. Let's not forget, these are terms that the left has popularized. Fake news was a term to undermine conservative-leaning outlets, which is ironic coming from the mainstream media which is now simply a megaphone for Democrat Party politics. As for alternative facts actually are alternative facts. They're not a contrary reality. They're not a parallel universe. When that phrase was used, it was Sean Spicer saying Donald Trump had the biggest inauguration crowd ever. It is true that in Washington, D.C., it was a smaller crowd, but the total crowd, when you factor in social media, television, and eyeballs around the world, was larger. The phrase alternative fact referred to that. It's a sophisticated point, and it's a subtle point that is certainly lost on the left, but nevertheless, that is a reality. And always with the left, they are projecting. They are projecting their own bigotry onto the right. They're projecting now their own anti-Semitism. You've got freshman members of Congress calling for the obliteration occupation of Israel, and yet they call conservatives anti-Semitic. That is nothing more than projection, and I think the same remains true of their claims of subjective reality and lived experience.
Thank you.
Very good question.
Hi, thank you for coming out tonight. You made mention that people like Amy Klobuchar aren't paying attention to reality as events like the polar vortex swept across the country the past few weeks. Per NASA, 18 of the 19 warmest years have all occurred since 2001, with the exception of 1998, excuse me. The year 2016 ranking as the warmest on record and record-keeping beginning in 1951. I'm wondering what you would believe for then would account for the increase in global temperature.
My only question is what Amy Klobuchar, or you, if you hold this view as well, predict will happen as a result of variations in recorded temperature by NASA, what you think that the tangible effects of that will be, and how you propose to stop it.
Oh, is this like, I mean, for me, it's just kind of more so hearing on.
Well, Amy won't answer the question either, and so and the reason that she won't answer the question is because, of course, there is no answer. She's complaining that we're not party to the Paris Climate Accord. We're doing a better job of fulfilling the Paris Climate Accord than the nations that are actually party to it. What is the prediction? We've been told a lot of predictions by global warming alarmists. New York is going to be underwater by the early 2010s. Didn't happen. Florida is going to be underwater. The polar bears are going to be dead. On and on and on. And it hasn't happened. So I want a concrete prediction of what's going to happen, and then I want a plan to stop it. Because so far, I've seen no plan to stop it other than this Green New Deal is the first piece of legislation which proposes we destroy 88% of American energy, we knock down every single building in the country, we outlaw air travel, we outlaw automobiles, we spend $40 trillion, and the way we pay for $40 trillion is to just print it at the Federal Reserve through, like, quantitative easing or whatever. So that isn't a plan, and I owe the person who proposes that idea, I owe them no explanation whatsoever of my point of view. If they are going to make an assertion and propose a policy to avert that oncoming catastrophe, I'm more than happy to entertain it, but they're simply behaving like children. The point I will make on this as well is that the left always talks about global warming as just believing in science. It's just the science. But for the left, it's not science, it's religion. This is why a bill designed strictly to combat global warming includes socialist health care. It's why it includes a universal basic income. It's why it includes a universal job program. It's why it involves totally redoing our democratic republic. Because for the left, it is a religion. It is socialism by the back door. It is a religion that has indulgences. You can buy indulgences, such as carbon tax credits. It has sin. It has original sin. It has pollution. It has all of the criteria, and for a people who would call themselves largely secular and modern, it fulfills a natural religious longing. But I know of no 19th century doomsday cultists who have ever been so consistently wrong as the left-wing global warming alarmists.
Thank you.
Hi, I just want to say I love your book.
Thank you you're clearly a scholar.
Absolutely. I just want to know, what sort of academic rigor did you put yourself through when writing it? Sourcing, just general information is not online available?
Obviously, I built on it from my undergraduate thesis in college. I had been preparing there for 4 years. I did some work. I studied abroad. And I spent about 27 years of my life researching the book. And when I finally sat down to write it, it was as though inspiration struck me from above. It poured out, it flowed right out of me, and within about 17 seconds, I had finished my first and final draft of that book. And so I'm planning a revised and expanded edition in about 10 years, but in the meantime, I hope that the first edition is serving you well.
It's truly remarkable. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, per the Emory Wheels request, I would like it if you could say your name when you ask your question. All right.
I'm Jasmine Jaffe.
Hi, Jasmine.
Hi. So next week, there's going to be a pro-abortion speaker here talking about how abortion is a moral good from a Christian perspective. How do you, how do you argue with someone who has such an extreme permission about abortion?
Well, I have an extreme position about abortion, which is that it's bad to kill babies after they're born or as they're being born or just before they're born or really any time before that they're born. I think that extreme position is easy to hold and easily defensible. The question you'll have to ask is what that person's premises are. Because there are 2 points to that topic. One, that abortion is a moral good, and 2, that it is Christian to kill babies. I seem to recall some verses of scripture coming from, a guy named Jesus Christ, who talked about he'll hold you accountable for whatever you do to the least of these, and tie a millstone around your neck, and it'd be better for, right, that guy. So I'd be curious as to what he says. I've never heard a coherent argument for abortion that did not also imply that it would be perfectly fine to kill other various human demographics. One of the arguments that cynical people make for abortion is that it's good because these kids, they'll all be on welfare and probably grow up and commit crime. And this is a very racist argument because everyone who makes that argument is saying that it's good to kill the little black kids, but you wouldn't want to kill the precious little white kids who grew up in the suburbs. And the question you have to ask him is, which young black man in an inner city would you be willing to apply that logic to at the age of 24? And look him in the eye, because they're never called out on the absolute racial bigotry of it all. In New York City, more black babies are killed in the womb than are born. That is horrific, and future generations will look on that barbarity with great moral opprobrium, and will look on the people who advance that with great moral opprobrium. And if this fellow is a Christian, then when he gets to St. Peter's Gate someday, I have a feeling that the eternal judge is not going to look very well on him spouting horrific heresy that has led people possibly of good faith astray. He will meet the millstone in the next world, and it would be better for him to correct his views in the present. All of that is to say, you should always take the level-headed approach. Do not, you'll notice I'm not yelling or screaming about this man. I'm not yelling or screaming, even about abortion, even as the Democrat governor of Virginia says we should kill babies after they're born. Because the truth is on your side. You don't need to pretend that this is some passionate interest battle that is brutal and unreasoned. For him it is, for you it's not. So I would calmly rip apart his arguments, and then I would advise him to go have a quick confession and repent before the judgment day.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Joshua Atler. My question is, what do you think is the best way to kind of argue in favor of capitalism and against socialism? Because it seems like a lot of young people today just kind of fully buy into this like utopian idea where we just like, oh, we'll just take money from the rich people and give it, just kind of.
Why not? They've got all that money.
Like it sounds good, but like how can you explain like reality, I guess?
It's wrong to take other people's stuff. This is bad. This is coveting your neighbor's goods. This is stealing. This is a very bad thing. This is envy. You can speak to them in basic terms like that. The majority of American millennials identify as socialist rather than capitalist. This is a new phenomenon in American history, and it's a very bad thing. The way that we can argue for capitalism is from a moral perspective. We should not strictly argue for it from questions of efficiency. It is true that free markets very efficiently allocate goods and services. They generate wealth. They generate wealth for everybody, not just some people, every single person. But this is not the strict argument. The argument for it should come from our moral sense. Free markets come from our property rights. Our property rights come from our idea of natural rights. Our natural rights come from our idea of the natural law. This is grounded in the history of the church. This is grounded in the school of Salamanca. Many popes have written encyclicals on the evils of socialism, how socialism should be rejected, not merely because it is inefficient, though it's very inefficient. People are eating rats in Venezuela because of how inefficient it is, but also because it is inhuman. It is anti-human. It stokes our vices. It suppresses our virtues. It is a wicked and evil system. The left talks about socialism in a moral way. It tries to pretend that there's a moral basis for it. We should speak in precisely those moral terms. We should not be eggheads with our spreadsheets talking about how the Laffer curve means that tax receipts to the government will increase when we lower taxes. No, boring. Nobody cares about that. We should speak in a very moral way, because one thing about young Americans is, although they are totally morally uneducated, they've grown up without a moral, ethical, or religious tradition in huge numbers. They are morally very curious. They are searching for purpose. They are chiefly motivated by a feeling of personal value, by a feeling of virtue. This is why they virtue signal. And we should give them something about free markets to virtue signal about, because there's a whole lot there that is virtuous.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kimia Tabatabai. Thank you for coming to speak to us. So I'm wondering, based on your point of climate change and all that stuff, so as I'm sure you know, William Buckley and President Nixon were one of the first people to actually make great strides in environmental protection. So my question was, is the conservative, I guess, denial or opposition to climate change based on the science that's been presented about it, or is it based on just a disagreement with the steps that need to be taken to implement protection measures that have been put forth by people on the left?
What am I denying, I guess, is the first question, because people say that conservatives deny the science of global. What am I denying? I don't deny that the temperature changes every year and that some places get hotter or some places get colder, or I'm denying that the polar bears are all dead, because they're not dead. The polar bear population has increased. I'm denying that New York is underwater, because New York is not underwater, as the left promised us it would be. I'm denying that Florida is underwater, because it's not underwater. I'm denying many of those IPCC climate models because they haven't proven to be true. I don't feel that I'm the denier. I feel that the left, which is sticking to their models in the face of reality, are the ones who are denying, the ones who insist that the whole world is going to be over within 10 to 50 years. It's just not going to happen. They have not presented a convincing case that warming is being primarily driven by man. They have not presented a convincing case that warming will be catastrophic and end human life as we know it. They haven't created a convincing case that any of their models are going to really bear fruit with their catastrophic predictions in 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, or 100 years. Now, if the question is, should conservatives protect our environment? Yes, of course. That's a wonderful thing. Conservatives conserve. But the left does get it backwards, and I will just draw this distinction. Conservatives tend to be conservationists. We like the environment because it's beautiful, and we like to spend time in it. We want to protect the deer population so that we can go hunt them, because we really like hunting them, and they're beautiful, and we like to have them on our walls, we like to see them prancing around, we like them on our dinner plates. That's very different than environmentalism, which puts the cart before the horse, which makes it seem as though human beings exist to serve nature in some quasi-divine way, rather than merely serve it up for dinner.
So what would be a proposal that conservatives would be in favor of, or would present, if you're not denying that global warming exists?
I certainly admit that temperatures rise and fall at various times, and that I suspect that of the myriad contradicting climate models that various scientists put out, one of them is possibly correct.
Okay, so if one of them is possibly correct, and if there was one way to fix that one possible correction, then what would be a proposal that conservatives would present? What would be something?
Fix it from what?
I mean,
of the temperature increasing 0.2 degrees in 100 years?
If there's a trend that may lead somewhere, then if we were to agree on that, then what
we
would
do
be...
agree that a trend might lead somewhere, but lead to what? What is the somewhere?
I mean, increased global warming equals increased air pollution, which is...
Does it? I thought increased air pollution causes increased global warming.
Yeah, burning fossil fuels increases greenhouse gases.
Does it? I'm not totally sure about that, because the main graph that the left used to argue this point, the hockey stick graph, was shown to be a fraud within the last 7 or 8 years. Right? The main bit of evidence in that Al Gore movie was fell apart over the last 10 years. So is there a relationship between carbon dioxide and increased temperatures? Yeah, perhaps. I suppose so. I'm not an expert on it. My question isn't even that. I'm perfectly willing to grant that that's possibly the case, and it's even possibly from greenhouse gases emitted by humans. But what's the end game? What's the upshot? What is that going to lead to? What catastrophe do I need to craft a public policy to prevent?
Okay, sure.
I don't know. If you can present that to me, I'm more than happy to engage in a serious policy discussion.
I mean,
but
I'm
it's
not an
not just
expert
you.
either,
It's
so.
not just you. Nobody on you are exactly as expert on this as any leading politician on the left, which is that they huff and they puff and they say that some catastrophe is going to befall us, which is why we need to take everybody's money and socialize the government and take away people's political rights and take away people's economic rights because of the catastrophe that's going to happen. And then we say, what's the catastrophe? And they say, how dare you? You're denying the problem. Show me the problem, and then we can talk about a solution. But until then, it's not the right that is being unserious about this question of environmentalism. It's the left that's being unserious.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Enrique Pujols. Kind of on the back of that, I wanted to ask you why Democrat policies when it comes to global warming and climate change are actually rather impractical. Like in the entirety of AOC's Green New Deal, right? She didn't mention carbon recapture at all.
She
right?
doesn't like it, yeah.
Well, she doesn't like it because you know who created that? Probably some capitalist, some guy like Elon Musk,
Some
right?
nerd at the Heritage Foundation or something, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But instead, she mentions like eliminating air traffic, eliminating farting cows. What is she gonna do? Kill all people? I mean, we emit CO2. I mean,
Governor
that's what we
Northam
do,
is
so.
trying. He hasn't succeeded yet, but he's doing
I know,
his best.
Right? He's doing his best. And maybe that's a climate policy, not an abortion one. I don't know. Who knows? But I didn't see anything that was actually viable. She also is anti-nuclear power. Now, I know why they're anti-nuclear power, which is because of strip mining. But wouldn't you say that the results of strip mining are far beneath the benefits of nuclear power?
Of course, nuclear
Yeah.
power is very efficient.
Yeah.
It's a green source of energy in so much as it doesn't release air pollution or carbon dioxide. What I love about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's Green New Deal is it exposes environmentalism for the lie that it is. The Green New Deal has nothing to do with protecting the natural environment. As always, the hysteria surrounding global warming, the Green New Deal, is about getting socialism by the back door. Just coincidentally, the catastrophe that awaits us 5 years down the road, or 10 years, or 20 years, or whenever is the day after tomorrow, the catastrophe that's going to affect us on the day after tomorrow demands that we give the political left every single thing that they have wanted for 150 years to fight the sun monster. It's simply not credible.
I don't know if you're a Star Wars fan, but it kind of reminds me of the moment where the Senate gives the Emperor emergency powers.
Yeah, that's what she's
That's
asking
exactly
for.
What it reminds me of that exactly, almost word for word, to be honest.
She said, in order to prevent the catastrophe that's going to happen the day after tomorrow, we need to
power will
give
be mine.
Alexandria Palpatine emergency powers
Me
that
set
will
propose,
allow her
you
to
know?
create any policy
Exactly,
whatsoever. No, of course it's
exactly.
right, and it's a total farce. And but of course this is the case because the left, they always talk about how we're denying science. Show me Alexandria's science degree. Show me Alexandria's PhD in physics or atmospheric science. I'll be waiting for that. I'll be waiting for that with.
By the way, what I get all the information that I get from is Steven Crowder had Dr. Patrick Moore on his show, and then I went up and I looked on YouTube because it's basically a sea of infinite knowledge, and I looked up Dr. Patrick Moore, and he went through all of the different graphs that the left uses and all of the different actual numbers, and he showed that the hockey stick graph that they talk about all the time. If you show before that, the disparity between carbon dioxide levels and temperature, global temperature, is vastly changing. It sways like this, basically.
Right.
And
Another great guy on this point is Dr. Richard Lindzen, former atmospheric scientist at MIT, who is now, he's called a science denier by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez types. He's called a science denier by people who have never taken even a remedial science class. This man is a professor emeritus at MIT. There are some excellent guys out there who are skeptics. skeptics, and they've had their careers ruined because they haven't towed the party line. Because apparently now we make science by political consensus.
True. May I ask a personal question really quick?
No way. Yeah, sure.
So I'm Hispanic. I'm half Cuban, right? And I have a lot of Latino friends at my college, right? And basically, we had an argument last year. I haven't talked to most of them since, but we had an argument, and in that argument, they basically attacked me for being white Hispanic, right? They said basically you're not Hispanic. Your parents probably appropriated your name. My full name is Enrique Marin Pujals. It's pretty Hispanic, you know. Like some of the other guys who look Hispanic, you know, dark skin, dark eyes, dark hair. One of them's like John Clark or something like that. You know, it's like I'm pretty Hispanic. I heavily identify with it. You know, like how do I get them to see past theirs? It's a stereotype. I have to be brown, I have to be dark, I have to be, you know, dark hair, dark eyes in order to be qualified as actual Hispanic, you know. Otherwise, I'm just a conquistador and I'm white, you know. How do I make them see that what they're doing is stereotyping themselves and other people?
Well, this was something I never understood about the left-wing hatred of Christopher Columbus. This comes out a lot. They hate Christopher Columbus because he discovered the New World and was oppressive in some way. They usually have no idea how he was oppressive because they've never read a single word about the man. Yeah. But Christopher Columbus invented the Latino race. Without Christopher Columbus, there is no such thing as Latinos. Yeah. Latinos are the mixture of Native American populations and Spanish European populations. But there's a real hatred. It obviously comes from an ideological bigotry. And the ideological bigotry is the same thing that motivates the hatred of Columbus or whatever, which is a hatred of the self, of the own tradition, our own tradition. In America, in all of the Americas, we descend, in part at least, from a tradition, a Western tradition that begets a Western culture that's based in a Western religion. And you constantly see the left trying to undercut that at every single step, even if they start to contradict one another in order to do it. This is the ideology of intersectionality, which says that a Muslim extremist and a gay activist need to band together against Big Daddy Western civilization, even though the extremist Muslim might want to toss the gay guy off of a roof in the middle of Iran. Yeah. It doesn't make a lot of sense, except that the only reality that they will acknowledge is the reality of oppression, which in many instances of their historical narrative, their selective historical narrative, is a fictive one or an incomplete picture that suggests that only one group of people has ever been abused in history, that our human nature is otherwise perfect except for those bad guys on Columbus's ships. That's a fantasy, and I'm afraid that you're not going to be able to reason with a fantasy that denies reality. You'll just have to convince them of the simple joys of being right, I think. It's the only way to do it.
Hey, thanks for being here. It's great to see you.
That's good to be here.
Hi, thank you for coming. I'm Zach Schuster, and I'm in a group of friends where we like to discuss and debate theological differences. We have Messianic Jews, evangelical Protestants, Greek, Russian, Romanian Orthodox, and of course Catholics. So one thing we've been debating is whether or not it would be appropriate to use the term ecumenical to describe ourselves, because traditionally ecumenical has meant coming together to root out heresies and draw good lines where they belong. But more recently, I think especially leftist groups have changed the meaning of the term to mean some kind of meaningless kumbaya, come together. So as an addendum, more generally, what should we do when the left appropriates perfectly good terms? Do we try to reclaim them and use them in their proper sense, or do we go on to use different terms with clearer meanings?
An excellent question, an excellent observation. To quote our president, always use the best words, folks. Always use language precisely. The left uses language as its primary tool of perverting the culture. They do this to all sorts of language. They deconstruct, quote unquote, everything. They've now deconstructed language such that I'm older than most of the people in this room. So I remember when the word man used to refer to someone who is not a woman. Whereas now, the secondary definition of man, of course, includes also possibly a woman. They take words and they deprive them of their meaning. Justice, which is getting your dessert without favor, is now perverted into social justice, which means getting what is not deserved because you are favored. This goes on and on. You should use the word properly. You should also root out heresy. You sound like you have a very fun group. I can't wait to join it. Next time I'm in Atlanta, I'm going to have to join your new Inquisition, and maybe we'll root out some theological heretics. Good question, and stay strong on the language.
We're all over the U.S., actually.
Really? What's
Yeah.
a group called?
We call ourselves the Morning Walk Group because it started as morning walks where we would talk about theology.
I like this
at
because I
5
can
a.m.
smoke while I do it, too. This is very good. The body is a temple, and the temple needs incense. Very good question.
Thank you.
Good question.
Mr. Knowles, thank you for coming out tonight. My name is Jonathan Loria, and asking from one Sicilian to another, you talked tonight about the importance of your faith and loving people in your politics. So how do you personally balance loving people with politically engaging with people who fundamentally and sometimes violently disagree with you?
I only do it because I love them. That's the only reason conservatives go out and constantly are trying to have dialogue, going to college campuses, constantly engaging in debate on the internet or in real life, is because we love people. If we didn't love people, we wouldn't do it. If the left likes to talk about a civil war in this country and how they hate us and the country's ripping apart. Trust me, if we had an actual civil war, it wouldn't last very long. Conservatives have all the guns, and we also have thought pretty deeply about our politics, relatively. So that wouldn't last very long. Fortunately, though, conservatives do love our countrymen. And so I always approach it from a position of love and a position of realizing that there are different kinds of debates. If I'm on a debate stage with somebody and I'm speaking in front of an audience, then the purpose of that debate is to own the lib. It is totally to wreck that guy so that you can see not that he is personally humiliated, but that his bad ideas are humiliated. If I'm at a coffee shop or a bar with that guy, I'm going to have a totally different perspective and a totally different tone because there's no audience in that point. What there is just me trying to convince a guy to come along to my point of view. But that is ultimately what we want. We want to bring people over to our point of view because we love our countrymen who are in our country. We're going to have to live with them, and we should try any tactic whatsoever to bring them over. We shouldn't get stuck on Johnny owns the libs. We shouldn't get stuck on just using humor. We shouldn't get stuck on just arguing from theology. We shouldn't get stuck on philosophy or economics or history. We should use it all, bring it in there. I have a rule. If I'm ever on Twitter and I'm getting genuinely angry, genuinely riled up and offended, I turn Twitter off. That is not going to make for a productive conversation. I might make a misstep, which would damage my own argument. I put it away. If people took that advice in virtual debate and real life debate, I think the quality of our conversations would improve immensely.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Mr. Knowles, thank you so much for coming out tonight. My name is Renzi Wilkie, and as just mentioned, you're a Christian, as am I. With this, our religion emphasizes the importance of caring for those in need. As our God King Donald Trump affirmed us the other night in the State of the Union address, the United States will never be a socialist country. With this in mind, how do you suggest we create a society that lives up to our moral conviction by caring for those in need without some sort of government mandate?
First of all, we already do. We have the most charitable country in the history of the world, and nobody dies in the streets in the United States. Everybody does have access to medical care. Illegal aliens have access to medical care. They get it by going into the emergency room. It happens all the time. The other way that we do it, which is a wonderful thing that Tocqueville talked about and was so impressed by in America, is our civic institutions. These are non-governmental private institutions. Catholic Charities is one of the biggest examples of it, but obviously a lot of different church groups, a lot of secular groups as well, though primarily they do tend to be faith-based organizations, go in and take care of people in need. The more local, the better, because the more local the organization, the more likely you are to know the person, the more likely you are to be able to tailor care to that person so you're not just wasting money on yet another bureaucratic, bloated program. That is a way to do it. We do have the most advanced medical care in the world. Unfortunately for us, our biggest problem is not precisely medical or even pharmaceutical. It's psychological and philosophical. We have in this country a declining life expectancy. It's now declined for 2 years, for the first time in 50 years. The reason for that is suicide and drug overdose. That's not something that's going to be fixed by socialist healthcare. That's going to be fixed by fixing a perverted culture that causes people to despair and to turn to drugs to solve their problems because their view of the world has become so distorted and inverted. No big government program is going to do that. Politics is downstream of culture. That's a cultural problem, and ultimately it's a religious problem.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hello, Mr. Knowles. Thank you for coming out here. My name is Chris Borg, and I have a question about journalism. With the rise of supposed non-biased journalists like Don Lemon and Chris Cuomo presenting their opinions, who Ben Shapiro calls a literal block of wood, presenting their opinion as the news on their show, even though, as the president has said, the ratings are terrible.
Terrible, folks.
Do you see the mainstream media to potentially correct this issue in their biases, or is the future of journalism doomed?
I mean, there's no present of journalism, so there's no future of journalism. But there's not even a recent past of journalism. These guys were always total hacks. Walter Cronkite, frankly, was a hack. I mean, he was a political leftist. He was a world federalist. He had a decidedly radical and left-wing point of view. He did a better job of hiding it, obviously, than Fredo Cuomo or his buddy Don Lemon. But that's just merely a fact of hiding the issue. When he declared that we had lost the Vietnam War, we had not, in fact, lost the Vietnam War, though he had favored pulling out of Vietnam for a considerably long time. The New York Times always had a bias. It's just gotten worse. It's just gotten more obvious. The Washington Post always had a bias. It's just gotten worse. It's just gotten more obvious. I'm all for it being obvious. I'm all for seeing people's point of view. Frankly, I think the post-war liberal consensus idea of the so-called objective media was always a way of disadvantaging people with conservative points of view and pretending that they were outside of the mainstream. We always had partisan press in all of the history of the world, certainly in the history of this country, and I think it's perfectly fine to return to partisan press. However, what you've got to do in that case is consume a lot of different news outlets. But that's good. I don't want anybody to read the New York Times and think they've got all the news that's fit to print. If you read the New York Times, you get all the news that fits the narrative. What you should do is you should read the Daily Wire. Obviously, you should watch the Michael Knowles show. And then you should go read Vox.com, if for no other reason than that you need a belly laugh. You should go over there and read, do people even read Daily Kos anymore? I don't know, all those left-wing crazy things. You should read that. That will give you a much better idea of how people are viewing politics. It will give you a more nuanced idea and a much less disingenuous view of people caricaturing the other side. You'll get both sides unvarnished and you can make your own decisions. That's the future of a certain type of journalism, and I think it's an improvement.
Thank you.
Yep.
Hi, my name is Albert Zhang. I'm the assistant news editor of the Emory Wheel. I know you just.
But you're a real journalist. Before you write up a report about this show tonight, you are a real good journalist. Just want to get that out there before I get a bad review.
Thanks. So I know you just answered a journalism question, so I'll keep this one short. What do you think the role of journalists should be in society, and how does that differ from what journalism is happening now? And if you could speak to the role of college newspapers in particular.
Journalists have a very important role in society. Journalists, frankly speaking, are people who write in the paper every day or write in the magazine once a week, who put their observations down on paper. Some try to do more straight reporting. Some, like me, do a commentary and do broader observation based on discrete events. That's a hugely important role. It's a privileged role in society. Talk about checking your privilege. It's a joy to be able to think about the world every day and then be able to express an opinion about it and hopefully have that influence the way that other people are thinking about things. As to where that goes in the world today, particularly from student newspapers, I loved writing for my student newspaper when I was there. I was one of the few conservatives. Everyone was very far left. Part of the purpose of student newspapers is for education. It's for people to learn how to write, to learn how to engage in the public square. This is why they did this with Naomi Rao, the new judge candidate who will be replacing Brett Kavanaugh, now that Kavanaugh has ascended to the Supreme Court. And they were trying to bother her about little articles she'd written as an undergraduate, saying things that they felt were too extreme. The purpose of undergraduate newspapers is to write a bunch of stupid ideas and to flesh out what you think in various op-eds. You shouldn't be held responsible for that. You're a student. When you become a professional, you should be held responsible for that. And ironically now, we're holding people responsible for the things that they did 35 years ago, or the op-eds that they wrote 35 years ago, or even the blackface that they wore 35 years ago. We're not holding them responsible for the views that they're espousing now, for the calumny that they are spreading now, or for the post-birth abortions that they are supporting now in the case, that singular case, of Governor Northam. I think we should extend a lot more grace to student journalists, and we should extend a lot less grace to professional journalists.
Thank you so much for your insight.
Yep.
My name is Jack Rubenstein, and you talk about the joy in being right. So my question is, how do you recommend being a passionate Republican on a campus that is so hostile to alternative points of view that speaking up in a class politically will not only evoke harassment, but can also lead to a professor penalizing your grade? Also, why do you think so many professors are liberals?
I'll do the first one first. Don't let them get you down, man. That's all I can tell you. Obviously, I mean, you're asking this question, so you're probably a little out of the closet. People might know your views. I think you're wearing a MAGA hat backwards. Is that correct? No, it's just red. But given the biases of the day, you can understand my confusion. Yes, you will face consequences. And I didn't graduate from college that long ago. I graduated 6.5 years ago from college, and I have noticed it has gotten so much worse since I've been there. You will face certain consequences, social consequences, academic consequences as a result of your political views and holding them. That's the cost. I mean, that's what life is. I think there's a perfectly fine case to be made to keep your head down and your mouth shut and make it through school, make it through law school, make it through med school, and then later on you can be more open about your views. I never had that amount of restraint. I was always a little too open about my views. I suffered for it in some ways. I don't regret a thing about it. It made me put my head on my pillow with a big smile every night. I think it contributed to that joy of being right. It allows you to feel your integrity, and it gives you a terrific intellectual advantage, which is that when your views are constantly being attacked and challenged, you will refine them. You will ditch certain ideas, you will go deeper into other ideas, you will figure out what you think, and you will know what the other guy thinks. And the other guy who's trying to persecute you, whether he's a student or a professor, is not going to have that advantage. He's going to be stupider, he's going to be crasser, he's going to be crueler, he's going to have a more miserable life. That's the disadvantage for him. You might get a B+ instead of an A-, you might not get into the fraternity that you want to join. Life has costs, and you got to deal with it. The reason that professors are a left wing is, I think there are many reasons for this. One, in some ways, in many academic disciplines which do not partake much of the real and they partake more of the theoretical, I think this is more conducive to a leftist lifestyle. I think conservatives generally are more compelled by practical pursuits. We're more compelled by making some money, establishing a family, especially men, and so a life of being a starving academic is just not always compelling. That's one reason. The other reason, which does not get spoken about, but this is dead to rights happening all the time, is that the left won't let conservatives in. We have tenured radicals running the campuses. Both the faculty, the department heads, the assistant deputy dean of diversity inclusion, whose job it is to keep out conservatives, all the way up to the president of universities, cowardly presidents. They deny conservatives tenure, they divert them from the track, they tell them that they are not welcome here. I have seen this happen firsthand. I've seen it while I was at college, I've seen it happen to academic friends of mine, people with stellar credentials, excellent background, excellent academic pedigree, barred because they wouldn't toe a leftist partisan line. I think that's where the real scandal is, and it's an ideological monopoly and an ideological mob that we have to break up among the faculties and the administrations. Yeah.
thank you all for coming out, especially those of you who disagreed. So let's give a final hand for Michael Knowles.
All right, thank you all very much. Very nice to be with you. Thanks. We're out of here. Have a good night.